Tennessee is full of stories that feel like they've been around forever. There are old stone forts, mysterious mounds, and legends that go way back before anyone penned them down. The state's landscape, with its peaceful hills, dense forests, and twisting rivers, seems to hide secrets from a time long before written history. These mysteries still linger today, adding a sense of wonder and curiosity to the quiet countryside, leaving us with more questions than answers. On a quiet morning, when mist still hangs low over the trees, a walk through Old Stone Fort State Archaeological Park feels almost ordinary at first. A narrow trail winds through tall hardwood trees, leaves rustle overhead, and the steady roar of water echoes from somewhere below the cliffs. The sounds come from two rivers, the Duck River and the Little Duck River, which wrap around the park like a natural moat. Most visitors begin their walk thinking they're simply entering a scenic hiking area, but then the trail opens into a broad clearing, and something about the place feels different. The air seems quieter here, almost heavier. The ground stretches out in a wide grassy field, and if you look carefully, you begin to notice something unusual. Long, low lines of stone running across the landscape. They curve gently along the edge of the plateau, sometimes disappearing beneath the grass before reappearing again farther ahead. These stone walls are the remains of what early settlers called the Old Stone Fort. The name, however, turned out to be misleading. When European settlers first encountered the site in the late 1700s, they assumed it must have been some kind of defensive structure. After all, walls made of stone usually suggest protection or warfare. But when archaeologists later studied the site, they realized something important. These walls would never have worked as a fort. They are not tall enough to block attackers. They are not thick enough to withstand a siege. In many places, the stones are simply stacked slabs of limestone placed carefully along the natural curves of the land. Instead of forming defensive barriers, the walls seem to guide movement, almost like boundaries that lead people toward a central gathering place. Standing there today, the layout feels less like a fortress and more like a ceremonial enclosure. The site itself sits on a dramatic natural formation. Over thousands of years, the Duck and Little Duck rivers carved deep gorges through the limestone bedrock. What remained between them was a high plateau shaped like a long, narrow peninsula. The ancient builders used this natural shape to their advantage. By adding stone walls along the edges where the land connected to the surrounding hills, they effectively completed the enclosure. The cliffs and rivers formed most of the boundary, while the stone walls finished the rest. From above, the design looks intentional, almost architectural, and that is what makes the place so intriguing. Whoever built this structure clearly understood the land. They selected a naturally protected platform and enhanced it with carefully placed stonework. Yet, despite the effort involved, the builders left behind very few clues about their purpose. There are no written records, no carved inscriptions, no obvious monuments explaining the meaning of the site. What archaeologists do know is its age. Most researchers believe the enclosure was constructed during the Middle Woodland period, roughly between 100 BCE and 500 CE. During that era, several indigenous cultures across eastern North America were building earthworks, mounds, and ceremonial spaces. These cultures were part of what archaeologists often call the woodland traditions, which included complex trade networks and sophisticated knowledge of astronomy and seasonal cycles. Middle woodland culture societies often created ceremonial centers rather than permanent cities. People gathered there for rituals, seasonal festivals, trade, and social events. Old Stone Fort appears to fit that pattern, but it also has features that make it unique. One of the most intriguing aspects of the site involves the main entrance through the stone walls. Researchers have suggested that the opening may align roughly with the sunrise around the summer solstice. When the sun rises on the longest days of the year, its light passes directly through the gap and illuminates the central area of the enclosure.
While the alignment may not be perfectly precise in the way some ancient monuments are, the possibility that the builders intentionally oriented the entrance toward the solstice has fascinated archaeologists for decades. It suggests that the people who built the enclosure paid close attention to the movement of the sun and the turning of the seasons. Standing there at dawn in late June, it is easy to imagine how dramatic the moment might have been for the community that gathered here. The first light of the longest day spilling across the open ground. The stone walls themselves are not imposing when you stand beside them. In most places, they rise only a few feet high. They are made primarily of flat slabs of local limestone stacked carefully along the edge of the plateau. Yet when you follow them from end to end, you begin to appreciate the scale of the work. The walls extend for nearly half a mile. Constructing them would have required the coordinated labor of many people, lifting, carrying, and positioning heavy stones across uneven ground. And yet, despite that effort, archaeologists have found little evidence that people actually lived inside the enclosure. There are very few traces of houses or long-term domestic activity. This suggests the space was used periodically rather than continuously. Many scholars believe Old Stone Fort functioned as a ceremonial gathering place, a location where different communities came together for rituals, seasonal events, or social gatherings tied to the agricultural calendar. The landscape itself may have played an important role in those gatherings. Stand quietly in the center of the enclosure and listen. The rivers rushing through the gorge below create a constant background roar. Waterfalls tumble over limestone ledges nearby, their sound echoing off the cliffs. When the wind moves through the forest canopy, it blends with the water and creates a shifting natural rhythm. Because the enclosure sits on a plateau surrounded by steep cliffs, sound behaves strangely here. Clap your hands in the open field and the echo rolls outward before returning softly from the rock walls of the gorge. Some researchers have suggested that this acoustic effect might have been intentional, that the site could have been used for ceremonies involving music, chanting, or communal sound. If you drive long enough across the highlands of Cumberland Plateau, you begin to notice something subtle changing in the landscape. The highways grow quieter, the forests thicken, long ridges rise and fall like frozen waves stretching toward the horizon. There is a certain stillness to the plateau, an atmosphere that feels older than the towns scattered across it. The air carries the scent of damp leaves and sandstone, and the forests seem to close in around the narrow roads that wind through the hills. Most travelers pass through without realizing that hidden in those woods are traces of human activity far older than the region's modern history. Among the trees, sometimes along remote ridges and sometimes tucked into quiet clearings, stand small piles of stone. At first glance, they look simple, just rough stacks of rock gathered into low mounds. A hiker might easily assume they are natural formations, or perhaps stones left behind by someone clearing a path. But when you stop and examine them carefully, the pattern becomes unmistakable. These stones were placed deliberately. They form what archaeologists and hikers commonly call cairns, carefully stacked stone piles that appear throughout parts of the Cumberland Plateau. The word itself comes from an ancient Scottish Gaelic term for a stone marker, but similar structures have been built by many cultures around the world. Here on the plateau, the cairns vary widely in shape and size. Some are modest piles, only a few feet high and perhaps 3 or 4 meters across. Others spread outward into broader, low platforms of stone that look almost like collapsed walls or foundations. What makes them intriguing is not just their appearance, but their location. Many stand on ridge lines where the forest opens slightly and the land drops away into wide valleys. Others appear beside old natural corridors through the hills, places where animals and humans alike have traveled for centuries. A few sit in places so remote and steep that it's hard to imagine anyone choosing to build anything there at all. Unlike landslides or random rockfalls, these piles show clear signs of human arrangement. Stones are balanced carefully on top of one another, sometimes forming surprisingly stable stacks that have endured years of rain, frost, and forest growth. Moss blankets many of them now. Tree roots wind through their centers like stitches holding them together. They look ancient. The Cumberland Plateau has been inhabited by indigenous peoples for thousands of years, long before European settlers arrived in what is now Tennessee. Archaeological evidence shows that various cultures moved through and lived around the plateau, from early hunter-gatherer societies to later agricultural communities connected to the broader traditions of the eastern woodlands. Some of the region's most famous archaeological sites, such as the large earthen mound complexes associated with the Mississippian culture, appeared later in nearby river valleys. But the stone cairns scattered across the plateau don't neatly match those traditions. They are not burial mounds, which are usually made of soil rather than stone, and often contain human remains or artifacts. Excavations and surveys around many plateau cairns have revealed little or nothing inside them. No pottery fragments, no bones, no tools. They are simply piles of stone. And that simplicity is part of the mystery. One common theory is that the cairns served as trail markers. Long before paved roads crossed the plateau, people traveled these highlands on foot. The terrain could be confusing. Rolling ridges, dense forests, and repeating valleys that made it easy to lose direction. In many parts of the world, travelers built cairns to mark safe routes across difficult landscapes. A stack of stones placed on a ridge could signal to others, this is the way forward. Standing beside one of these structures on a high overlook, the idea feels plausible. The view stretches for miles across forests and valleys, and you can easily imagine someone long ago placing stones here to guide the next traveler. But the theory does not explain everything. Some cairns sit far from any known historical trails or natural travel corridors. Others appear in clusters where no clear route connects them. Their placement sometimes seems almost random, which raises doubts about whether navigation was their primary purpose. Another possibility is that they served as memorial markers. Across many cultures, small cairns were built to honor the dead, especially those who died while traveling far from home. A group of hunters or traders might stack stones to mark the place where someone passed away, creating a small monument that others would recognize. Yet again, the archaeological evidence is limited. Most plateau cairns contain no human remains, and many show no signs that anything was ever buried beneath them. The emptiness is striking. Some researchers have suggested that the cairns might have functioned as territorial markers, signaling boundaries between hunting grounds or regions used by different communities. Others propose they may have marked spiritually important places, locations where ceremonies or rituals once occurred. These ideas are harder to test scientifically, but they fit the landscape in an interesting way. After all, these structures have survived this long because people respected them. When you encounter a cairn deep in the woods, it rarely announces itself dramatically. It simply sits there, quiet, steady, and patient, a small human gesture preserved in stone. You can stand beside it and imagine the person who placed the first rock. Perhaps they were marking a path, honoring a memory, or performing a ritual that made perfect sense in their own time. Whatever their reason, they likely expected the pile to remain long after they were gone, and they were right. The cairns of the Cumberland Plateau continue to stand among the trees, resisting weather, erosion, and centuries of change. They offer no clear answers about their origins or purpose, but they remind anyone who encounters them of something important. The land we walk through today has been shaped by countless lives before ours. Sometimes, all that remains of those lives is a quiet stack of stones, waiting in the forest for someone to pause, look closely, and wonder.
When you first arrive at Bell Witch Cave, the most striking thing is not what you see, but what you feel. The place is quiet, not the gentle quiet of a peaceful countryside, but a deeper kind of silence, the sort that makes you instinctively lower your voice. It sits at the base of a limestone ridge near the small town of Adams, partially hidden by trees that curve along the hillside. A narrow stream slips past the cave entrance, its water moving softly over smooth stones. Even that sound feels strangely muted, as if the landscape itself is listening. Most people who come here know the famous legend connected to the Bell family and the haunting that terrified them in the early 1800s, yet the story of this place did not begin with them. Long before settlers built farms and cabins here, the cave already carried an air of mystery. And that earlier chapter is what many visitors never hear about. As you walk toward the cave entrance, you notice a steady breath of cool air flowing outward. It happens in every season. Whether the outside air is heavy with summer heat or chilled by winter winds, the cave exhales with the same slow rhythm. Locals sometimes describe it as the cave breathing. The opening itself is not especially large, just a jagged gap in pale limestone, but once inside, the space quickly expands beyond what you expected. The rock walls twist and narrow, then open again into wider chambers. Your footsteps echo strangely, sometimes bouncing back from directions that make it difficult to judge distance. Even with a strong flashlight, certain pockets of darkness seem unusually dense. Long before European settlers arrived, Native American communities had moved through this region for thousands of years. Archaeological finds, stone tools, fragments of pottery, and traces of camps show that people knew these hills very well. Across much of the southeastern United States, caves were often regarded with caution and respect. In many traditions, caves were seen as entrances to the underworld, places where the boundary between the living world and the spirit world might grow thin. It is important to say that historians have found no single documented native legend specifically describing the Bell Witch as we know it today. However, oral traditions from many southeastern cultures did treat caves as powerful and unpredictable places, locations where spirits, ancestors, or other unseen forces might dwell. That cultural background helps explain why places like this cave often gathered stories over time. According to later folklore, people in the area spoke of a presence tied to the ridge itself. In some versions, it was described as a female spirit living within the stone. She was not purely good or evil. Instead, she behaved more like a watcher of the land, sometimes helpful, sometimes mischievous, sometimes quick to punish disrespect. Hunters passing through the region reportedly spoke of strange experiences near the bluff. Some claimed to hear footsteps behind them even when no one was there. Others described faint lights drifting near the cave entrance at night. A few early travelers mentioned a tone in the air, something like distant singing carried by the wind. These reports appeared long before the famous haunting associated with the bells. By the late 1700s, European settlers were beginning to farm the surrounding land. For them, the cave was mostly a curiosity, a natural feature on the edge of their fields. Children dared each other to explore it. Teenagers tested their courage by venturing deeper inside with lanterns. Yet even these early explorers often came back with stories. They spoke of whispering sounds in the darkness, of torches flickering out without warning, of something tugging at clothing or hair when they squeezed through narrow passages. These accounts were usually shared casually, not as grand ghost stories, but as uneasy observations. When the John Bell family settled in the area around 1804, the cave already had a reputation: quiet, local, and slightly unsettling. The events that later became known as the Bell Witch haunting unfolded mainly at the Bell family home rather than inside the cave itself.
According to folklore, the spirit responsible was often identified as Kate Batts, a neighbor whom the Bell family had allegedly wronged. Whether this figure was a real ghost, a symbolic character added later, or something else entirely, remains a matter of debate among historians. Still, the cave gradually became linked with the legend. One popular story claims that a bellboy once became trapped inside a narrow passage when part of the rock floor shifted beneath him. As the tale goes, an unseen force supposedly pulled him free just before he suffocated. There is no historical proof that this event actually happened, but the story illustrates how strongly people came to associate the cave with a mysterious presence. Over time, the cave and the haunting became inseparable in the public imagination. Today, visitors who tour the cave often describe similar sensations. The interior is cool and damp, with a faint smell of minerals and wet stone. The floor can be slick in places where water has polished the limestone smooth. When groups reach the deeper chambers, some people report feeling a sudden chill across their shoulders. Others mention pressure in their ears, as if someone is standing just behind them. Occasionally, small pebbles fall from ledges without any obvious cause. Guides usually explain these events in natural terms: shifting rock, condensation, changes in air pressure. Yet for those already familiar with the legend, the experiences can feel strangely personal.
The wind moves through the trees, shifting the shadows around the cave mouth. In that moment, it becomes easy to imagine someone standing here hundreds of years ago, watching the same dark opening, feeling the same quiet pull from whatever lies inside. Whether the cave truly holds a spirit, or whether its reputation grew slowly from human imagination, one thing is certain: the place remembers its stories. Every footstep that entered the darkness, every whisper shared in fear or curiosity, every tale passed from one generation to the next, all of it seems to linger in the cool air drifting from the stone. And even if the famous Bell Witch legend had never been told, the cave would likely still feel the same, like a doorway, not just into the earth, but into something older, deeper, and harder to explain.
When most visitors arrive at Shiloh National Military Park, they come expecting a story about the American Civil War. Cannons line the roads, historic markers describe troop movements. The quiet fields recall the violent two-day battle fought here in April of 1862, one of the early turning points of the war. But if you walk farther into the park, away from the monuments and the battlefield trails, you eventually reach a place that feels far older than the 19th century. The land begins to rise in smooth, rounded shapes. At first, the hills look natural, gentle swells in the earth shaped by centuries of rain and wind. But when you pause and look closely, you begin to notice a pattern. These are not ordinary hills, they are ancient mounds. Together, they form what archaeologists call the Shiloh Mounds, a ceremonial and political center that existed here long before soldiers marched across these fields. The mounds sit on a high bluff overlooking the broad waters of the Tennessee River. From this vantage point, the river bends quietly below, just as it did 1,000 years ago when this place was alive with activity. Standing among the mounds today, it becomes clear that this was never a random landscape. The earth rises in deliberate shapes, some tall and flat on top, others lower and rounded. Between them lie open spaces that once served as plazas, places where people gathered for ceremonies, meetings, or daily life. The entire complex spreads across dozens of acres, and even though centuries have passed, the layout still feels purposeful. The largest mound, known to archaeologists as Mound A, immediately draws attention. It rises longer and broader than the others, its summit flattened by design. At one time, a large wooden building almost certainly stood on top of it, likely the residence of an important leader or perhaps a council house where community decisions were made. Nothing of that structure remains today. The wood has long since decayed, leaving only faint traces of post holes discovered during archaeological excavations. But the mound itself still carries the memory of what once stood there. People do not move that much earth without a reason. The builders of these mounds belonged to a long tradition of mound-building societies in eastern North America. In fact, the Shiloh site is somewhat older than the famous Mississippian cities that later dominated the region. Archaeologists generally place the major occupation of the site between about 800 and 1100 CE, during what scholars call the early Mississippian culture period. These communities were skilled organizers and engineers. They did not have metal tools or draft animals, yet they reshaped entire landscapes using baskets, wooden spades, and human labor. To build a mound, workers carried soil basket by basket, stacking layers of earth until the structure rose several meters high. The process took years, sometimes generations. Each mound represented not only physical labor, but also social cooperation and leadership. At Shiloh, several mounds were arranged around an open plaza that likely served as the heart of the community. Imagine the scene 1,000 years ago. The plaza would have been alive with activity. Traders arriving by canoe along the Tennessee River, families gathering during seasonal festivals, leaders addressing the community from structures atop the mounds. Smoke rising from cooking fires while music and voices filled the air. The river itself played a vital role in the life of the settlement. Flowing just below the bluff, it acted as both a highway and a source of food. Canoes could travel hundreds of miles along interconnected waterways, linking Shiloh to distant communities across what is now the southeastern United States. In that sense, the people who lived here were not isolated villagers. They were part of a much larger network. Archaeologists have found pottery styles, trade goods, and cultural influences that connect Shiloh to other emerging centers throughout the Mississippi and Tennessee river valleys. Ideas, traditions, and materials traveled along these rivers just as easily as people did. For several centuries, the settlement at Shiloh thrived. Homes stood near the mounds, wooden buildings were repaired and rebuilt as generations passed. Evidence of hearths, ash layers, and clay floors suggests long-term occupation and repeated construction. This was not a temporary camp. It was a stable community, deeply rooted in the land. And then, sometime around the early 1100s, the story changes. The rebuilding stops. Structures are no longer repaired. Construction of new mounds ends. The people gradually leave the site, and the community disappears. What makes this particularly intriguing is how quiet the transition appears to have been. Archaeologists have found little evidence of destruction. No burned buildings, no clear signs of warfare, no widespread chaos preserved in the soil. Instead, the settlement seems to have been slowly abandoned. Why that happened remains one of the central mysteries of the site. Across the southeastern United States, many mound-building communities experienced dramatic social changes around this time. Some grew into powerful urban centers, while others faded away as populations shifted. Today, the mounds blend quietly into the landscape of the park. Visitors sometimes walk past them without realizing what they are seeing. Children run up the grassy slopes. Photographers capture the peaceful view of the river. And just a short distance away, the Civil War battlefield tells a much more recent story. Yet in many ways, the older story feels deeper. The Battle of Shiloh lasted only 2 days in 1862. The mound builders lived and worked on this bluff for centuries. Their lives shaped the land long before the sound of gunfire ever echoed through the forest. Walking the trails near sunset reveals the site at its most powerful. The low light stretches across the grass, and the mounds cast long shadows over the plaza. For a moment, the shapes become clearer, the geometry of an ancient town reappearing beneath the modern park. You can almost imagine people moving through the space again, a leader standing atop Mound A, families gathering in the plaza, canoes gliding along the Tennessee River below the bluff. Then the light fades and the landscape grows quiet again. The mounds remain where they were built, silent but enduring, reminders of a community that once flourished here and then, for reasons lost to time, chose to leave. That quiet absence is what lingers most strongly at Shiloh Mounds. The earth still holds the shapes of their world. The river still flows past the bluff. The wind still moves through the trees exactly as it did centuries ago. But the people who built this place are gone, and the land keeps their final chapter to itself.